Welcome, everyone. My name is Curtis Derry. I'm Senior Vice President over here at Powerland Xerox IT. I got a special guest that I love talking with here, Jordan Nanos. He's the AI specialist and part of the field CTO team globally, working on a lot of cool projects and opportunities with HP. Jordan, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Curtis.
It's been a while, and it's always great to catch up with you. And obviously, we're talking about the hot topic that everyone wants to talk about in the industry, which is AI, right? And I know we've talked briefly in regards to where the industry, is shifting, and obviously, you're fortunate to be working on some really cool projects at a global lens. And so, I want to talk to you about your perspective on, what you're seeing around, private AI, public AI. Where those use cases land. How do people really start to take advantage and embrace AI? And I know everybody gets excited about it. And I know myself, I use ChatGPT literally every day. I embed it into my lifestyle to help me just scale and get back time. But also, I think companies are struggling with, they want to start, they want to do it, but they're, again, nervous. Like, do I just go to ChatGPT and give them all my crown jewels of data? Do I start myself? How do I start myself? Can you give us some context from your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the trend with generative AI, I think, is both incredibly hyped and also really relevant. Like, I use ChatGPT and other generative services like Perplexity every day because it's just a better experience than Google search. The numbers speak for themselves. 180 million active users on ChatGPT. They've generated over $2 billion of revenue since they dropped that product. So, public AI is a rocket ship. I see it with the background behind you, nicely themed for what we're talking about today. I got the reactor core.
Yeah, empowering me.
Big behind me. No, but this is Frontier behind me, actually, the largest supercomputer in the world that we delivered here to the Department of Energy, Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee. And I think it represents the fact that there is a lot of people that are building custom AI or private AI in ways that are going to be effective for their business. And it's not happening immediately. So I like to take people back to the summer of 2020 when OpenAI really released the base model, GPT-3, that the very first version of ChatGPT was powered on, and say, look, if you look at the timeline, it really took over 2 years for them to develop a product based on that model that started the rocket ship and made it take off, right? The model was there. The base model was available. I remember working with it and working with designing these prompts to try to actually come up with a new marketing name for one of our new products here at HPE. Try to see if it could come up with something kind of Italian sounding, the way we've been naming all our products recently. And it came up with some good examples, which I thought was fascinating, but didn't really use it much for 2 years. And then in December of 2022, it was like I used it to write my Christmas cards. Made me much more, thoughtful than I guess I am without it. And I think a lot of people are in that experience right now where day one of using AI happened when ChatGPT was released. Mm-hmm. And it's been about a year, we're coming up on 2 years, where the applications for enterprise organizations are really starting to take off, like assisting developers with code or troubleshooting errors. Chatting with complex PDFs. Like I've seen that with standard documents for people trying to train new users or, train new call center agents or improve how they can do their job, onboard new people who are working in a warehouse or, associates in a retail store.
I've seen that, because one use case I use for that is teaching my team is personas. So I have all these different personas for me personally in my ChatGPT, and I have ones for I have one for my trainer, I have one for cooking, I have one for selling, business conversations. I create all these different personas that I keep trying to model. And to me, that's an area of you're kind of talking about, right? Is all these different personas that you can start to use from ChatGPT. And I think what I tell people, I go, you always want to embrace anything that's $1 trillion industry. Never fight it. Don't delay it. Start now, right? Because it ain't going away. You know what I mean? And so the more you understand it now, the better you are in the future. And that's, I guess, something I've always lived behind, knowing that if this race is happening, be a part of the race. Don't fight the race. And it's just, it's like all these different industries hitting us, right? Whether it's crypto and all these other things. I go, our next generation is going to live in digital, right? whether it's currency or not. So don't fight it, just embrace it, just to learn about it, be curious, right? The word I hate the most, and I tell people it should be eliminated from the dictionary, is assumption. I hate assumption. When people tell me they assumed, well, I assumed. Nothing kills me more than the word assumed.
Okay. Yeah, it's really interesting. So let me pick on one point that you made there about personalization or the
Yeah.
personas. One of the really interesting things that we've seen with organizations is that, and it's really led to a lot of the dynamics you may have seen in the supply chain recently and some of the, and the stock market, is that the infrastructure foundation for any of these different generative AI use cases is really the same. Like
Yep.
we're talking about high performance accelerators that are not the CPUs of the past, high performance network with high bandwidth, high performance storage. You get the sense that these things require performance, right? And the performance of the application really depends on the performance of the underlying infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the faster you get a response from the model, the faster you can display it to a user and the more natural it feels. So laying down that foundation is something a lot of organizations are doing globally. And then really finding out where this applies to their organization by, you know, business unit or by use case or by type of data becomes almost an afterthought. However, I can absolutely share some upfront examples. The biggest thing that I see from organizations that we work with at HPE is private AI. The idea that the way you customize or personalize an AI experience is with your data sets. So,
Can you define that for our listeners, though, Jordan, just so they truly understand the difference between private AI and public AI?
yeah, I mean, frankly, it has to do with network traffic. Like, where are you sending the data?
Yeah.
If you are using ChatGPT today on your phone, on your laptop, on a server, you're making an API call to a data center that's run by Microsoft Azure, and a response is being sent back to you.
Yep.
And you know, we can talk about how, for example, streaming responses are insecure. Um, there's, you know, you can decode streaming responses that are encrypted to clear text based on some research that, you know, I was reading recently. And just generally speaking, a lot of organizations' policies or regulatory requirements don't allow them to send certain data to that API endpoint. So you could imagine like product documentation for a newly released product or an upcoming
Yeah.
product for a hardware company. You cannot upload that PDF to a Azure data center in every case, and then have users come along and who aren't familiar with the new product kind of chat with the specs. You got 200 pages of specs. Instead of doing keyword searches and reading the whole thing, you want to ask sort of an agent how to, you know, what's new with this product,
Yep.
explain some differences, things like that. Another example is a code base. So imagine you hire a new developer and you've got some complex code base with a bunch of comments and a bunch of markdown documents that kind of describe what it does. They got to try and read line by line and play with it. What if they had an assistant that was next to them that could kind of read through the code and explain what certain functions are doing and expose that experience? Obviously, code is like one of the most protected pieces of intellectual property that organizations all over the world have. It's not just software companies, right? Banks
Yeah.
develop code, telecommunications companies develop code. So just some examples of, you know, an idea that like if you want to have a ChatGPT like experience,
Mm-hmm.
but you want to have it with your proprietary or confidential data, you're going to need some infrastructure, frankly, deployed where that data is. Like data gravity applied to AI is just the biggest trend I'm seeing right now.
That's where you're getting pulled into these global opportunities, is customers wanting to run AI on the edge within their environment to keep it private, fast, all the other things that we talked about, governance, et cetera, et cetera.
I think
Security,
it's
obviously,
both.
being a big thing.
Yeah, it's absolutely both those customers, and it's also this newly formed concept of a cloud service provider that's dedicated to AI, where HPE as an organization works with a lot of these kind of startup CSPs or startup AI software companies who are looking to deploy their infrastructure in a SOC 2 Type 2 compliant data center,
Mm-hmm.
or are looking to um, just help somebody deploy a new colo and optimize things because that organization who wants to run these models does not have experience with an InfiniBand network or a
Yep.
parallel file system or even Kubernetes, you know. Um, it's funny. You know, I see a lot of people talk about the skill sets required to get into AI.
Yeah.
People today are AI users. Like there are hundreds of millions of AI users in the ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot sort of ecosystem, right? I go on YouTube, I search for Learn PyTorch, and there are videos with millions of views. But we look at NVIDIA's CUDA developer program, and they talk about how they have a really robust group of 40,000 CUDA developers. I was talking to somebody at SC, like a conference back in November about this, how, you know, you start with a really big, group of potential users. You go a little bit smaller to the people who can kind of understand how the models work. And then you go really far down to the people who really understand performance. And what I'm seeing the most is that the skill sets around building a cloud or building a high performance cluster are what's lacking as much, if not more, than the skill set of working with these new models, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
There are a lot of open source technologies and a lot of new startups that will help you take one of the over 500,000 open source models on Hugging Face,
Yeah.
download it to a system, run it in a Docker container, and feel like I have full control in a way that I didn't when I was using the ChatGPT interface or the ChatGPT API. What's lacking is like, how do I take that model and that experience of running it in a customer private way and scale it across my enterprise? You know, when
And is that where
somebody
you're
wants,
fitting? Is that where HP's fitting in to the AI race? Is coming in to help customers architecture better to take advantage at scale and consume it as a service, I guess, at the end of the day.
that's it. Yeah, it's exactly right. Like when you think about the foundation for all of these different applications that could pop up, you need not just the infrastructure, which, we're a provider of that, uh, but also the expertise to like, give you peace of mind that this project is going to be successful and we're not going to wait months and months to have this thing turned on and stood up and be accessible. You don't always get that when you buy one component from here and one component from
Yeah.
there and you try and integrate it all yourself. So organizations that are looking to do that private AI experience and they're looking for peace of mind that this thing's going to work, that's where HPE gets brought in and where me specifically, where I've been spending a lot of my time.
And I think that's the pivot that, maybe not everyone sees from HP, right? Obviously, traditional hardware company has been making a massive pivot over the last, call it 5, 10 years now, right? And I've always respected Antonio and his vision of execution, right? There's a lot of IT CEOs out there that talk a big game but fail to execute, but I see Antonio executes on his vision. And I was actually quite impressed when I heard John Chambers speak. A lot of people call him, Godfather of IT and stuff like that. And he said one of the companies most set up for success in the AI future is HP, right? And from your landscape into our customers and listeners, where would you see, like, how do customers first just start? I think it's a little bit, reminds me a little bit of like, virtualization and VDI era, right? Like, I was there when VDI first came out. I actually kind of sold some of the first virtual software in Canada. And I remember people going, I'm never going to virtualize like a server. Like, you're crazy, right? And of course, and that was in 98. And then 2000, 2003 started to go like crazy in Canada, right? I feel like, AI is at that right now where everyone wants to talk about it. It's cool, but I think people are scared of where do we start? And then they're like, well, we don't have skill set or we don't know where to apply it. And then where do we go use it? Do we just go hit ChatGPT? Do we go to Microsoft, Gemini? Like, who do we go, hit up, right? So what would you recommend to the listeners with your broad experience to say, start here, like start with this conversation, and this is a good place to start?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. So I think that there's like it ends up becoming a three-step process to pursue, in my opinion, the development of a business application powered by AI that has a potential ROI, right? That's
Give me a use
significant.
case on one.
So the one I mentioned earlier about training new developers. Let's imagine you have a
Okay.
code base that's internal and you say, I would like to have a chat bot that I completely control where a developer can, you know, upload an error message they're seeing or upload a piece of code that they're working on where they want a new function definition written and just have the model basically write the code, write a unit test or write a deployment script or something like that
Yep.
where Explain, some verbose Python error message for some
Yep.
new, script, like front end application that you're building. I'm thinking about Gradio right now because I was just working with that, and it bothers me that I have to read through all of this stuff. So uh, yeah, the point is that and famously, when ChatGPT was released, a number of engineers at Samsung were kind of reprimanded, and ChatGPT access was shut off for all software engineers because they were uploading,
Oh,
highly protected code to
yeah.
ChatGPT's interface, right? And that's not really something that the organization wanted. So let's imagine that you have that example in mind, like the coding assistant, and it could be the example I talked about earlier, like training new employees who are going to work on a call center hotline, or
Yeah.
we're going to be an associate in a store, or training on a manufacturing floor. The point is, you can chat with a model today, and it's got knowledge from the whole internet, but it doesn't have specific knowledge that's domain specific, like your data. And you want the experience of chatting with your data, right? I see that as a three-step process. People basically start by downloading and running a pre-trained open source language model.
Yeah.
I said this earlier, there's lots of them on Hugging Face, probably the most popular repository out there for them. Popular models like Llama 2 from Meta or Facebook AI Research, Mistral from the company Mistral AI in France, a new one that Databricks just announced, ZBRX. There's many more, and ones that are good at code, one that are good at long output. You basically, step one is just learning how to work with those models in your data center. It's going to require a GPU. It's going to require or another accelerator. It's going to require some amount of storage space, some understanding of like Docker and basic Linux commands to get this started. And a lot of people will be learning those things for the first time, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of step one. Step two is actually building like a front end, or like an experience for a user so that they can work with the model. You'll hear people talk about customizing prompts. You talked earlier about
Yeah.
building a persona. In many cases, if you add in a system prompt that the model is supposed to behave like it's a good coding assistant, and you're going to tip it $20 if it gives a good response, its
Yeah.
performance improves, right? So kind of having that experience is step two. And then step three is really connecting in that specific data set that you're working on for retrieval. Technically, this requires running a second model, typically a much more lightweight model called an embedding model. It may require the use of something called a vector database. And so those kind of Linux or Docker or Kubernetes skills will be required to get multiple microservices working together to give you that one full application of like, not only does the coding assistant works, but it can now, point to a specific piece in my code base where it's referencing its answer from, and give me a link back there, right? So that's three-step process, and the concept, generally, the acronym people should Google is RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, where your original generation is being augmented with the retrieval of some data set that's
Oh, cool.
proprietary
Okay.
to you.
Yeah.
That's kind of the killer app that I'm seeing for private AI right now.
Okay. So that's, yeah, and that's where you're getting engaged with the customers' journeys on AI. And these are obviously well-established big organizations, right? That are, like knowing where to place our bet. How do we take advantage? And, to me, it's again, one of those eras that we're in, that if you're not embedding it and embracing the race now, you're going to be a lagger and maybe not be around in the future if you don't. That's just the reality.
It does seem, yeah, to your point earlier, it does seem kind of undeniable after having had some of these experiences of working with the assistant or the chatbot, that this is something that's only going to get better over time, and people are going to demand that experience from their organizations.
Yeah, because I mean, and then you think about the workforce and the younger generation that are going to live in it. So think of like what their expectations are when you fast forward time 5-10 years from now, what they expect and how fast the results. Like we were in an instant on, hit the button, environment already. Like imagine now with adding AI onto that, it's going to be crazy how fast people want gratification answers and move quickly type scenarios, right? It's I love it. I mean, I think that's why we're both in tech, right? We love the industry, how much it changes, the technology disruption that happens, and obviously you're in a great space, being with, one of the top companies in the world, right? To be able to, be in the CTO office, you get to have, great opportunities to, learn and understand best practices. And, that's where I feel fortunate, to have a relationship with you, to be able to have you on a podcast, to give our listeners, the opportunity to hear, bright minds like yourselves with this type of exposure. Not everyone gets that. And on top of it, you're Canadian like myself.
Yeah, sitting out here in beautiful Squamish, British Columbia, looking at
Not
the
beautiful
nice spring
Winnipeg,
weather outside. Yeah, yeah.
Not beautiful Winnipeg like myself, but
really, I thought you were just outside the Millennium Falcon, looking behind you there.
I feel that when I get in my vehicle, maybe, but not in my office.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
Well, listen, I really appreciate your time, man. I know you're a busy guy, with the schedule you have, but it's always great to sit down and just have an open conversation with you, and definitely look forward to staying in contact with you in the future and having another podcast conversation with you. And probably, it'll be curious to be able to have this as a benchmark of conversation, understand, fast forward time, how much has changed since, that previous conversation.
Yeah, let's get some feedback from the audience. Anybody who listens to this, let us know. Find us on LinkedIn, or I don't know.
Hey,
email,
Jordan up, man. Get him
however it gets
engaged
out
with
there.
you as a customer. I can tell you he's going to bring, as you saw in a brief couple minutes conversation, how much knowledge he can bring to help you expedite your journey around AI. I mean, that's why he's sitting in the field CTO office.
Fair enough. Thanks, Curtis. Yeah, great to be here today.
Thanks, Jordan.